SDERA, the analog foundation. Standard definition wasn't a choice, it was a technological ceiling. For decades, television resolution was locked at 480 horizontal lines in North America and 576 lines in Europe, not because engineers lacked ambition, but because analog broadcasting had hard physical limits. Here's how it actually worked. Cathode ray tube televisions used electron guns that fired beams at phosphor-coated screens. These beams painted the image line by line, top to bottom, roughly 30 times per second. The number 480 refers to those horizontal scan lines, the literal rows of glowing phosphor dots that formed your picture. But here's where it gets technically messy. Most standard definition content used interlaced scanning, meaning each frame only updated half the lines. Odd numbered lines refreshed, then even numbered lines refreshed. This saved bandwidth, but created that signature flickering effect if you looked closely. The resolution sounds primitive now, 640 by 480 pixels for standard definition video, but it was perfectly matched to analog limitations. Broadcast signals traveled through the air as radio waves, and cramming more detail into those waves wasn't just difficult, it was mathematically impossible without better compression technology. Cathode ray tubes also had natural softness. The phosphor glow blurred edges slightly, which actually worked in standard definition's favor. Makeup looked smoother, sets looked more expensive, and low-budget effects appeared more convincing because the format itself masked imperfections. Standard definition survived because it was good enough. Your brain filled in missing details. The content mattered more than pixel counts. Families gathered around these sets for half a century without complaining about resolution because they had nothing to compare it to. But here's the part people forget. Standard definition still exists today, and not just in old broadcasts. Security cameras, video doorbells, basic webcams, they still use 480p or lower because higher resolutions require more storage, more bandwidth, and more processing power. For a camera recording 24 hours a day, standard definition makes perfect economic sense. It's also why old shows look terrible on modern screens. They were mastered for soft, forgiving cathode ray tube displays, not razor-sharp panels that expose every limitation. HD Ready, the marketing trick. 720p arrived with a promise. High-definition television, 1280 by 720 pixels. Progressive scan, widescreen aspect ratio. It sounded revolutionary, and compared to standard definition, it absolutely was. But the industry played a clever game with terminology that confused millions of buyers. HD Ready became the magic phrase slapped on TV boxes everywhere. It meant your television could accept a 720p signal, but it didn't guarantee anything about what you'd actually see. Many HD Ready sets had native resolutions lower than 720p. They'd receive the signal, then downscale it to match their actual capabilities. You paid for high definition and got enhanced standard definition with better marketing. The resolution itself was legitimate though. 720p delivered roughly 920,000 pixels per frame, more than double what standard definition offered. Progressive scanning meant the entire image updated simultaneously instead of alternating lines, which eliminated interlacing flicker and made motion smoother. Sports broadcasts looked dramatically better. You could finally read jersey numbers and see facial expressions from across the field. Two technologies dominated this era: plasma and liquid crystal display panels. Plasma screens worked like millions of tiny fluorescent bulbs, each pixel a gas-filled cell that glowed when electrically charged. They produced deep blacks and vibrant colors, but generated serious heat and sucked power like a space heater. Liquid crystal displays used LED backlights shining through liquid crystal shutters. They were cooler and more energy efficient, but struggled with black levels. Everything looked slightly gray instead of truly dark. Here's what made 720p significant beyond the numbers. It forced the aspect ratio change from 4:3 to 16:9. Television screens finally matched movie theater proportions. Black bars disappeared. Content felt more cinematic. This shift mattered more than most people realized because it changed how directors framed shots and how studios produced content. But 720p had a short reign. It was the awkward middle child, better than standard definition, but immediately overshadowed by 1080p marketing. By the time average consumers understood what 720p actually meant, manufacturers were already pushing full HD as the real deal. Still, 720p wasn't worthless. It proved consumers would pay premiums for sharper images. It established progressive scanning as the standard, and it taught the industry that resolution numbers sold televisions better than any other specification. The HD Ready scam worked so well that marketing departments never stopped using the same playbook. Full HD, the sweet spot. 1080p became the resolution that actually delivered on the high-definition promise. 1920 by 1080 pixels, progressive scan, roughly 2 million pixels per frame. This was the format that ruled living rooms for over a decade, and still dominates most content today. The jump from 720p to 1080p sounds mathematical, mathematical, but the visual difference was immediately obvious. Text became readable, faces showed detail, background elements that were previously blurry mush suddenly had definition. Blu-ray discs launched specifically to showcase 1080p content, and for the first time, home video quality exceeded what most movie theaters were projecting. Panel technology matured significantly during the 1080p era. Liquid crystal displays adopted LED backlighting, which allowed manufacturers to build thinner screens with better brightness control. Some sets used edge-lit LEDs around the frame, while premium models used full-array backlighting with local dimming zones that could darken specific screen areas for deeper blacks. Plasma displays peaked during this period too, offering superior motion handling and contrast ratios before the technology was eventually abandoned. HDMI cables became standard, replacing the mess of component cables and multiple audio connections. One cable carried video, audio, and control signals. Refresh rates increased from 60 Hz to 120 Hz and beyond, which reduced motion blur during fast action, though manufacturers definitely exaggerated the benefits, claiming their motion smoothing features made everything look better when they actually made movies look like cheap soap operas. Here's why 1080p lasted so long. It hit the resolution threshold where most people stopped noticing improvements under normal viewing conditions. Sitting 8 to 10 feet from a 50-inch screen, your eyes can't distinguish individual pixels at 1080p. Going higher requires either sitting closer or buying a significantly larger television, and most living rooms have physical limits. The format also benefited from timing. It arrived just as streaming services launched. Netflix, Hulu, and others built their entire infrastructure around 1080p delivery because it offered the best balance between quality and bandwidth requirements. Even today, most streaming content maxes out at 1080p because internet connections can't reliably handle higher resolutions without constant buffering. 1080p proved that resolution wars have practical limits. Sharper images matter, but only up to the point where human vision stops perceiving the difference. Everything after 1080p has been about pushing boundaries that most viewers can't actually see under real-world conditions. Yet manufacturers keep selling higher numbers anyway. Quad HD. The resolution TV skipped. 1440p is the resolution nobody talks about, and there's a reason for that. 2560 by 1440 pixels, roughly 3.6 million pixels per frame. It sits awkwardly between 1080p and 4K, sharper than one but not quite reaching the other. Television manufacturers looked at this middle ground and decided it wasn't worth the marketing hassle. The resolution found its home in computer monitors instead. Gamers adopted 1440p enthusiastically because it offered a practical compromise. Running games at 4K requires serious graphics processing power, the kind that makes expensive graphics cards sweat and frame rates tank. But 1440p delivered noticeable sharpness improvements over 1080p without destroying performance. You could actually play demanding games smoothly while still enjoying crisp visuals. Monitor manufacturers loved 1440p for another reason: pixel density. On a 27-inch display, 1440p hits roughly 109 pixels per inch, which makes text razor sharp and images detailed without requiring operating system scaling. For productivity work, photo editing, and anything involving reading lots of text, it's genuinely superior to 1080p. Professional users gravitated toward it not for gaming, but because it made their actual work easier. So why did televisions completely skip this resolution? Marketing mathematics. Television companies realized that jumping from 1080p to 1440p didn't give them a clean, simple number to advertise. They couldn't call it 2K because that term technically refers to cinema resolution at 2048 by 1080. They couldn't call it Quad HD and expect consumers to understand what that meant. The jump from Full HD to Ultra HD 4K was cleaner, easier to explain, and sounded more impressive. There's also the content problem. No broadcast standard exists for 1440p. No streaming service targets it specifically. Blu-ray discs don't use it. Creating a television resolution that has zero native content makes no business sense. Monitors get away with it because computers render everything in real time at whatever resolution the display supports, but televisions rely on external sources. Here's the quiet truth though. 1440p influenced television technology more than most people realize. The panel manufacturing techniques, the improved color accuracy, the higher refresh rate capabilities, all of that development work during the 1440p monitor era fed directly into 4K 4K television production. It was the invisible stepping stone that made the 4K transition smoother and cheaper. 4K Ultra HD, the marketing victory. 4K arrived with maximum hype and a confusing name. The resolution is actually 3840 by 2160 pixels, which is why it's technically called Ultra HD or 2160p, but the industry branded it 4K because bigger numbers sell better. Roughly 8.3 million pixels per frame, exactly 4 times the pixel count of 1080p. The visual improvement is real, but context matters enormously. Sitting 10 feet away from a 55-inch television, most people struggle to see the difference between 1080p and 4K. Your eyes simply lack the resolving power at that distance. But move closer, buy a bigger screen, or watch content with fine details like nature documentaries, and 4K becomes obvious. Individual strands of hair, fabric textures, and background elements suddenly have definition. Panel technology evolved significantly for 4K. OLED displays became commercially viable, with each pixel producing its own light instead of relying on backlights. This delivered perfect blacks and infinite contrast ratios because pixels could turn completely off. QLED technology added quantum dots, microscopic crystals that emit pure colors when hit with light, improving color accuracy and brightness. Mini LED backlighting used thousands of tiny LEDs for precise local dimming control. High dynamic range became 4K's secret weapon. HDR isn't about resolution, it's about brightness and color range. HDR content can display brighter highlights and darker shadows simultaneously, with a wider color palette than standard dynamic range content. The combination of 4K resolution and HDR made a bigger visual impact than resolution alone ever could. But here's where reality gets messy. Most 4K content isn't actually native 4K. Streaming services compress heavily to save bandwidth, which destroys fine details. Netflix 4K uses roughly 25 megabits per second, while true 4K Blu-ray uses 100 megabits per second or more. That compression difference is massive. You're technically watching 4K resolution, but you're not seeing 4K quality. Cable and satellite providers are even worse. Many upscale 1080p all content to 4K, which means the source material has no extra detail. The television just invents pixels to fill the screen. True native 4K content exists primarily on Ultra HD Blu-ray discs and high-end streaming services with premium subscriptions. Internet infrastructure also limits 4K adoption. Streaming 4K requires consistent 25 megabit connections, which millions of households simply don't have. Buffer less frequently than that, and the stream drops to 1080p automatically. The technology exists, but the delivery systems haven't caught up. 8K and beyond. Diminishing returns. 8K takes resolution into absurdity territory. 7,680 by 4,320 pixels, approximately 33 million pixels per frame. It's 4 times the resolution of 4K, 16 times 1080p, and completely unnecessary for virtually everyone watching television. Here's the brutal math. To actually perceive the difference between 4K and 8K on a 65-inch screen, you'd need to sit roughly 3 feet away. That's not comfortable viewing distance. That's why am I this close to my television distance? For normal living room setups where people sit 8 to 12 feet back, 8K resolution exceeds human visual acuity. Your eyes physically cannot resolve that level of detail from typical viewing distances. The content problem makes this worse. Almost no native 8K content exists. A handful of YouTube videos, some demo reels that manufacturers loop in stores, and basically nothing else. No streaming service delivers 8K. No broadcast standard supports it. Ultra HD Blu-ray tops out at 4K. The few 8K cameras that exist are used for production workflows where footage gets downscaled to 4K for final delivery. What 8K televisions actually do is upscaling. They take 4K content and use artificial intelligence processors to invent the missing pixels. The TV analyzes the image and makes educated guesses about what details should exist at higher resolution. Modern upscaling is genuinely impressive, but it's still creating information that wasn't in the original source. You're not watching 8K, you're watching very good fake 8K. Bandwidth requirements are punishing too. Streaming 8K would require sustained 100 megabit connections at minimum, probably closer to 200 megabits for decent quality. Internet infrastructure in most countries can't support that consistently. File sizes explode as well. A 4K movie on Ultra HD Blu-ray typically uses 50 to 100 gigabytes. An 8K version would require 200 to 400 gigabytes or more, which exceeds current disk capacities. So, why does 8K exist? Marketing. Television manufacturers need new products to sell every year, and resolution numbers are easy to advertise. They've run out of meaningful improvements that consumers understand, so they just keep doubling pixel counts and calling it innovation. Beyond 8K, the industry experiments with technologies that might actually matter. Micro-LED displays use millions of microscopic self-emitting LEDs for perfect blacks without OLED's burn-in risks. Quantum dot OLED combines technologies for better brightness and color, transparent displays, rollable screens, and AI processing that optimizes every frame represent genuine advancement. But resolution itself has hit practical limits. We've reached the point where human vision is the bottleneck, not technology. Future improvements will focus on color, brightness, contrast, and features rather than adding more pixels nobody can see. And if you want to understand how those screen technologies actually work, that's a whole different nightmare worth explaining.